First off, just want to say welcome and thank you for being here. We know that May is a very busy season in the world of education, both professionally and also often personally. So thank you for finding the time and for protecting this time to be here and join us for this content. This is the second of the Project Arise Spring workshops this May. And we'll talk at the end about another opportunity coming up later this month for some additional learning. But really excited to welcome some friends from TNTP today to share about foundational skills instruction and how we can best meet the needs of all of our learners. So thank you for being here, and we hope that you get some takeaways that you can implement in your classroom or your school system or your spaces as early as tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alina from TNTP.
Thanks so much, and hi everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you. And as Emily mentioned, today and always appreciate the tornado of a time that May can often be in the education world. And so just really appreciate you taking time this afternoon. My name is Alina. I'm here with my colleague Beth, who you'll hear from in a moment. We're from TNTP, which is an education nonprofit that's had the great luck and fortune of partnering with Emily and with Michelle and with Melanie and other folks across Glen, San Diego, and Contra Costa for Project Arise. Really happy again to be here with you today. We are going to dive right into research-based foundational skills, instructional practices, part 2. And the reason that we're calling this a part 2 is if you were with us in the fall, you might remember that our fall workshop focused on what we kind of consider part 1 of foundational skills, where we really started to dive into all things systematic and explicit and start to kind of really grapple with what a strong research-based foundational skills instruction mean, knowing that that is always a more simple sentence to say than it is to actually enact. If you weren't here with us for them, that's completely fine. We're really happy you're here today. Beth just dropped in the chat a resource page where we have all the sessions from the fall, if you want to catch up, and then the session today, which is also meant to be a standalone session, where we're going to dive into that second half around practice and assessment and differentiation. The resource page I also want to mention has notes to links to the foundational skills observation tool. It also has links to the Project Arise course, where you see the screenshot here. And then it also has links to 2 of the videos that we're going to use in our session today. So go ahead and grab that and we'll reference it a couple of times in the session. We have 3 main outcomes for our time together today. We're going to hope to identify some key components of effective foundational skills instruction. We want to use the foundational skills instructional practice guide, which you might be familiar with from the Arise course or from your other work, to observe and identify some key components in a sample lesson. And then we're hoping to create some time and space for some collaboration with Rollo-like peers to discuss some conditions in your school or district that are needed to bring these components to life for students. And so with that, no folks are busy. If you wouldn't mind in the chat, just taking a quick moment and introducing yourself, with your name, your district, and your role. Always love hearing who's in the room. Thanks, Sandra, for kicking us off. Michelle and Eve and Melanie, welcome. All right, we'll let those continue to come in. Again, always just really, really helpful to hear your role, who's in the room, or you're with. One of the benefits of this workshop, one of the benefits of Project Arise is that we can really kind of create this community of educators and community of practitioners who are kind of commonly curious about this and what it looks like in terms of implementation across the state. So appreciate you doing that. And again, I really appreciate you being here. Please feel free to keep adding to the chat. I'm just going to move forward to make sure that we keep with time. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start off with just a quick connector. Then we'll go into some key components of research-based foundational skills instruction. We're going to focus on 2 elements today: practice and assessment and differentiation. We'll use the foundational skills IPG to take a look at one example of what this looks like in action. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're hoping to have some time and space for some role-like collaboration. As we kick off, we know that there is so much expertise coming to this room and so much experience around what foundational skills look like in the classroom. We'd love to hear again in the chat, what's one effective foundational skills practice you have observed in the classroom or used in your own classroom in the past month? So I'll give you a moment to think, and then would invite in the chat whatever comes to the top for you. I love the comments and connections being made in the chat already. Thanks, Nicole, for kicking us off. Phonemic manipulation. What else? What's coming to the top as you're thinking about foundational skills? Decodable readers with partners. Thanks, Beth. I love, Beth, that you mentioned kids are super engaged. It's fun. Decodable readers can be really fun for students. Thanks, Mark, providing students opportunities to apply target skill to reading and writing. Always appreciate that you're mentioning both, right? That it's not just reading when we're thinking about literacy, reading, writing, speaking, listening, all of those 4 components. Blending lines for decoding, phonics, scope, and sequence. Beautiful. We'll invite you to hold to all of that. Again, we're going to be digging into a couple of different components today. Won't have time to talk everything foundational skills, but again, we have a few resources. You might be curious about some more things. As many of you probably know from the Arise courses, and potentially if you were with us in the fall workshop, one of the models that we refer to often around how students become really confident readers is this model called Scarborough Rope. And if you were with the center around the executive functions workshop a couple of weeks ago, you might have seen this as well. Today's session is going to focus on the word recognition part of the rope. We know that language comprehension is incredibly important as well. We're going to be narrowing in on just where we say the sounds, the letters, and the words, again, as we continue to think around reading foundational skills. The foundational skills course in Arise and also the comprehension course, they focus on these 4 key best practices in literacy, supported by research, supported by evidence, and aligned really specifically to the strands on Scarsborough's Rope. Again, today we're going to focus on the first area, explicit and systematic practice with reading foundational skills. But we also want to plug that to learn more about the other 3 areas, complexity, knowledge, and evidence-based. We really encourage you to visit the comprehension course in Project Arise. So our fall workshop, again, focused on the first 2 elements of foundational skills instruction, ensuring that instruction is systematic, that it follows this research-based progression, and that it's really explicit. So students have this opportunity to read and write and hear and say foundational skills, so much of which we already saw in folks' comments in the chat already. Today, we're going to focus on the last 2 elements. The first, ensuring that foundational skills lesson includes daily practice. So that is to say opportunities for students to practice skills in and out of text, making meaning from what they're reading, and assessment and differentiation. So ensuring that teachers are gathering data to ensure students are learning and then using that data to make necessary adjustments to instruction depending on students' needs. So we'll go ahead and dig into student practice, and I'll go ahead and pass it to Beth.
Thanks, Alina. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm Beth. I live here in the Bay Area, and I'm super excited to start talking a bit about student practice and what this looks like. So when we talk about student practice and foundational skills, we're talking about practice of specific skills in and out of a text. So this also includes, and it's incredibly important to note, that it also includes making meaning from what students are reading. So we're going to talk about a few examples of what we mean by this in and out of context practice. And actually the visuals that are on the screen they're visuals of the materials that are used in the lesson that we're going to watch at the very end of this session. And we actually watched some of it during our fall workshop, and it's included in our course. But when we think about student practice in foundational skills and students practicing the target sound spelling pattern that you're teaching, we want to provide them with opportunities to practice within the context of a text. So that's the image you see on the right there. And we also want to give them opportunities to practice out of context on the text, which you can see on the left there, where students are working on writing and adding that E to those words there. I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see closely, but hopefully you'll be able to see it when we zoom in there on the screen. So it's important, research says students need to have at a very minimum, at least 5 opportunities, but many, many more to practice a target skill. And so all of these opportunities in both of these contexts are incredibly important within their day and their week that they're learning these sound spelling patterns. So you'll see on the next screen another example, and this is actually kind of an example that is moving from the out of context practice slowly into a little bit more context within sentences and moving into a text. So in this example, students are reading. So if you are a part of our spring workshop or have been engaged in the course, we'll talk about how students need opportunities to hear sounds, to say them, to read them, and to write them. And so this is an opportunity on this practice where students are reading the sounds within the context of words. And on the one we saw previously, they're getting practice writing. So there's lots of different ways that this can look. We're going to look on a few slides at this in context practice within a text. But when we look a little bit later at the observation tool, you'll see some more examples there of some of the other types of practice that students can have. So sometimes it is something like a worksheet. Other times it can involve manipulatives or multisensory activities where students actually get a chance to practice by moving and manipulating letters to make words. So there's lots of different ways that this can look. We're going to zero in a little bit now also on what this in context practice looks like within a text that is a decodable reader. So within this text that we see here on the screen, students are getting practice reading the same spelling patterns that they were explicitly taught previously in their lessons. So when they come to this text, they are being exposed to a text that has been controlled to ensure that only the sound spelling patterns students have learned are within this text. So you'll notice a few things about this one here. And when we go to the next slide, I'm going to ask you to share some things that you see, but I'm going to name a few things that we can see here about this text. So we'll notice that within this text, you'll see some letters highlight or kind of bolded. So those are drawing students' attention to the spelling pattern that they're focusing on that week and where they see that represented within the words. You'll also notice that this decodable reader is called Seth. And I'm assuming based on that picture and the name tag that is a picture of Seth. So it gives students an image of the person that they're reading about. But then as they read about how Seth must get in bed at 10 and he can jump on his bed and different things that he's doing. But you'll notice that the picture is just of him. It's not of all the things that he's doing. So the pictures are not giving students clues necessarily about what they're reading. Students are really focusing on the words that they're decoding as they're reading to get that practice. And so that's really an important component of a decodable reader that we want to highlight here. On the next slide, we have 2 different examples here, and I'm going to ask you just in a second to look at these and tell me a few things about them by putting some ideas in the chat or coming off mute. So the text that is on the left, so those 4 boxes go along with the words at the bottom of the screen. We just kind of wrote them out so you could see them more clearly, but they go along with the pictures that are above of that fox. So that is a type of text that may come within a leveled reader set, but is more of what we would call a predictable text. So this may be a text that a teacher is considering using for student practice of a foundational skill. The text on the right is a decodable text, so more similar to what I mentioned on the last slide. And so I want to give you a second to look at the 2 texts and the words again on the bottom just match what's on top. It's just to help you read it a bit. And just tell me what you notice about the differences between these two texts that a teacher may choose to use for student practice in their classroom. What do you notice that's different about the two of them? And feel free to come off mute. Feel free to put some ideas into the chat.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I think for me the difference is with the Fox 1 and 2, they don't have the garden, and down 1 and 2, they do have garden. And the sunflower, I mean the sun. And
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and I couldn't get to unmute. Are you looking at the pictures? Or are you referencing the pictures in the story or the words in the story?
the pictures. The pictures that you said that we're supposed to do the words or the
You can look
pictures?
at it, both of it all together. There might be something you notice about the words or about the pictures on the right the pictures on the left and the words in the story, as well as the pictures on the right and the words in the story. You can be looking at either. So I think what I'm hearing, tell me if what I'm hearing is correct, that you're noticing that there are some things that are in the words that are also in the pictures, and then there are some things that are not. Did I
Yes.
hear that?
Yes. See.
Okay. Okay. So within some of these, the sentence, there are definitely some clues within the pictures that the student might use to help them answer or to help them read the sentence. That could be
Okay.
one takeaway that we're seeing. What else?
Okay.
And I see in the chat, Courtney said that the first one repeats the same words. So we're seeing that my garden has is repeated many times in that text. Yes, so early readers would likely have the skills to decode the words on the right, for sure. And anything that we notice about the words on the right in that story as well. Yes, we see CVC words within that story. So the words within that are mostly decodable for the students that would be reading this. And I didn't give you this. These are both considered to be texts that, according to the published use of them, could be used with kindergartners. So we can see that students would be able to decode the story on the right. What was named that we want to highlight here with the one on the left is that as a predictable text, that once the student knows that the words say my garden has, they are most likely going to be able to read them, oftentimes without even looking at them, without being able to actually decode them. They're going based on the memorization because it's the same words every single time. And also, like was named, because there's some really specific picture clues that go along, at least with some of those pages, not necessarily all of them. Students may be able to pretty easily shift their eyes from the words to the picture to guess what they think that last word is. And while there's very much a use for pictures to keep stories engaging for students and to support their understanding, we often find that with a predictable text with this type of structure that students are tending to use the picture, to overly rely on using the pictures as opposed to using the skills that they have learned to decode. The text on the right has been controlled for the skill that students have learned. So students have been working on those CVC words. They're going to mostly be exposed only to those words within that text. They're going to probably also feel more success as they're reading it, which, leads to that engagement that we talked about earlier. When students are feeling successful as they're practicing, it's more fun. It's more fun to read something that we can understand. Sometimes the stories are a little bit silly, and they don't really have a strong, deeper meaning, but students, sometimes they laugh when they, Hap hid the ham. So they're looking for a ham underneath the hat. I mean, that's a silly thing. That doesn't really happen. So there's an opportunity for students to laugh and to have a conversation, to have a little bit of meaning making that can come out of this reading of this decodable text as well. So looking at the one that we have on the next slide, we just want to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that come with overly relying on these predictable texts when reading. So we'll often find that in the early grades, some students may feel success reading those predictable texts that sometimes might come with a leveled reader set. So the words here are coded. So if you see a green word, that's a high frequency word that students have been introduced to in their classroom. So they're going to feel success reading that. And those blue words are mostly words that are cued based on the pictures. So students can, in many cases, guess what that word is by looking on the pictures. So for our kindergartners, we might feel like, you know, we're feeling success in reading. We might feel like our students are gaining confidence and are able to accurately read that text. And that might continue for a little while. But I'm going to show you an example of a text in 3rd grade. So this is a text from a leveled reader set that would be, you know, approximately at a 3rd grade level, that is not designed to be a decodable text. So you'll notice here that, actually, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what do you notice here about the green words and the blue words when you get to 3rd grade? What do we notice that we see a lot fewer of when we get to the 3rd grade in this text? Yeah, I'm seeing this come into the chat. So there's less picture cues. Yes, those blue words, they have almost disappeared. We have a watermelon, but otherwise, and spider, but the rest, the picture cues are not there anymore. So for our students that have really been relying on those, that is going to become more and more challenging for them. They're not going to feel that success, and we're going to see that reflected in their ability to read these types of texts. So it's just another example of why, when we're thinking about the text that we want to use for specific practice in foundational skills instruction, we really want to work on using those texts that are decodable and that are going to be aligned with the skills that you have taught. Now, all of that to say, our next slide kind of just summarizes some of those differences between leveled and decodable text, leveled or predictable and decodable texts. A lot of what is on the slide here we've talked about, but I want to name some specific examples of how I have seen teachers still use both of these types of texts within their classrooms. So I actually work with a school here in San Francisco. I was with them yesterday talking a lot about this exact topic, and they use Benchmark Advanced is their materials. So with Benchmark, they have decodables that they use for practice of foundational skills instruction. They've also been given leveled readers in their materials that are aligned to the topic that they're learning about. So they use the decodables for student practice of foundational skills, which is what we're talking about today. And then they use the leveled readers to help students build their knowledge and vocabulary of the topic that they're learning about. So they use them, but for a different purpose. So they're not using them to practice foundational skills. They're using them to, you know, to build vocabulary, to help students build up that background knowledge they may not have on the topic, that because they're using the one that's aligned to their unit. So that's just one example of how some curriculum do have multiple types of text within them, and there's still going to be a place for those materials if you've been given them. We're not encouraging you to just, you know, keep them put away on the shelf. Think about what is the best way to use them for a specific purpose that may not be aligned to practicing foundational skills. So one last piece we want to know before we ask for some reflections on this. We've talked about the importance of meaning making, and that even when we are reading a decodable text, we really still want to have conversation with students about what they're reading to support their understanding and to ensure that they're understanding what they're reading. So in addition to just in addition to just ensuring that we're feeling like they're being successful with the skills that are in the decodable text, through that practice, we also want to ask them, some really basic questions. So most of these decodable readers, like I mentioned before, don't have like a deep central message or theme that we can analyze, but we want to ask students some simple questions so we can have a conversation about their reading. This is really important, building their oral language skills to reinforce vocabulary that students may be able to read, but may not know the meaning of. There's a lot of important reasons to ask some simple questions like this after students are reading a decodable in practice, but we don't need to overdo it and ask them to do a really, deep analysis. Like think of that text earlier about the hiding the ham underneath the hat. We can ask them some questions and kind of laugh about it together, and that'll help us to see that they're understanding what they're reading. So we want to have some conversation, whether you want to come off mute or again, put into the chat. A couple of questions here just to offer to think about this
can I go
student
early
practice.
so I can be
And we want to think about what is the importance of ensuring that there's significant opportunities for practice within foundational skills lessons. Also, how have you observed or used decodable text with students in your classroom or in classrooms at your school or district? And where have you seen success with these types of texts? And what challenges have you experienced using them? So a couple of different questions here. You're welcome to think about any of these that resonate with you, and we'd love to hear what you're thinking. So you can come off mute, you can put in the chat. If this has sparked a question for you, we'd love to hear that as well.
Hi.
Hello. Yes.
For me, my class, because I have worked like one-on-one with the students, and she's on verbal. We don't use the test or the phone testing, something like that. No, but we use a lot matching, like first and then icons, a lot, and they benefit her a lot.
Did you say icons like pictures?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, like first and pictures, but that like all the calendar, the schedule that she's going to have the whole 6 hours. And I said, go check the schedule. And she knows she's on verbal, but she's really challenging and using the iPads more than before.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for sharing that example, and such a great example of the strength of using visuals and something that a student can move or to show and indicate their understanding. So thank you for sharing that example.
Okay.
Anyone else? Anything else that you're thinking about related to student practice? Thanks for that common challenge, Michelle, of using some students read them quickly and others don't. So thinking about the opportunities to read in partnership, to reread, and what students are doing. We're going to actually see some students reading some decodable readers together with partners later on in our video. Thanks, Melissa, for sharing that reflection, especially as it relates to older students. I was a 3rd and 4th grade teacher myself, and so this content, as I've learned it through the years, has very much resonated with me in terms of where I saw struggles with my students at that age. Thanks for sharing some reflections. I think if something else comes to mind or if a question pops up for you, feel free to put that into the chat. We're going to keep going and talk about our second point here, our second area of focus, which is assessment and differentiation. I'll pass it to Alina.
Well, thanks again for the reflections. And again, just encourage you to keep them coming. It can take more than a second to type out some responses in the chat. We're going to keep moving and talk kind of about what's next. This best practice of practice. Now thinking about how do we know how students are doing, and then really important with the second point, what is it we're doing with that instructionally, and how are we really attending to students' needs? So a lot of text on this slide, and we'll go through everything. One of the things we started off this session talking about Scarsborough's rope and those best practices in literacy. And again, probably a simple sentence to say, right, that we know that literacy is complex. Assessment in literacy is complex as well. One of the key points we want to make here, we end up assessing foundational skills and language comprehension in some pretty different ways. So language comprehension, which again, we're not getting deep into today, we think of that as exposure-based. So thinking about vocabulary and knowledge, really building kind of slowly through exposure, like Beth mentioned, potentially with those topic-based text sets, through reading, writing, speaking, and listening about a topic. That's a little bit different than when we're talking about our focus today around foundational skills, which we would consider to be a mastery-based assessment form. So in a systematic phonics program, thinking about the way that the skills build pretty quickly, they build in an intentional order, and we want to make sure that we're building students' mastery of the skills so that they can use those as prerequisites for future lessons. We're going to take a look at some kind of examples instructionally of what this might look like, but to preview some of that, one of the things that it means is that teachers need to pay some really close attention to student acquisition of the target skills, and kind of think again around what that's going to mean instructionally. Oh, I'm getting a lag on Zoom. I'm hoping you can all still hear me. Okay, great. So here's really our key takeaway for this. Students must master foundational skills. Don't simply cover them once and check them off after you teach them. And as Beth was talking about practice, we want to think about that with taught skills and new skills that continue through the entire school year, and then cycle back for periods of review as well. So we're going to actually start by taking a look at some assessment in action. We're going to watch just a quick peek of a video, just 1 minute, that shows a teacher using one form of assessment to support one of her students. We're also going to see kind of instructionally what she starts to do with some of that data. So as you're watching the video, just invite you to think about these two questions. What types of assessment did we see in this lesson? And what do we see the teacher doing with the assessment data? Or what might we think she might do with the assessment data? So I'm going to go on mute and we'll watch the video for about 1 minute.
Put it in the boxes, okay? Just like we've been doing. And then I wrote how I would spell the word above it, okay? Okay. What was different about how you spelled and how I spelled, okay? Okay.
Well, I got this correct.
Did you think I said the word and?
I think so.
So when I say the word and, how many letter sounds do you hear in that one? 2. So I just wrote 2 sounds. And, okay?
Okay.
Let's look at this word rip. Rip. Should we tap that word out together? Ready?
What?
Rip. Rip. How many sounds do you hear in that word?
3.
I hear 3 sounds too. How many letters did you write in your word rip?
4.
Yeah, you wrote 4. You threw in a T in there. Rip.
Rip is kind of like C, V, C.
Exactly. It's that consonant, vowel, consonant. Good. So I have a goal in mind for you, but do you have a goal in mind for yourself, what you want to work on with your spelling?
Draw the letters correctly so we can hear which letter what in the word.
Okay. So what was helping you a little bit was stretching out the words. Sometimes it helps to tap it out so you can hear exactly how many sounds you hear in the word, okay?
Okay.
So I'm going to say a good goal for you, Makai, would be to tap out your words. And why do we want to tap out those words, Makai?
So we can hear each letter what's in the word.
So I can hear each letter in the word. That's a great goal. Give me 5.
End of cycle assessments give teachers useful data
There we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause there. I would love to hear either in the chat or coming off mute. What did you see in terms of this type of assessment? What kinds of things did you see as teacher doing to assess the students' reading foundational skills? And then what did you see her doing with that assessment data? Again, feel free to come off mute. Would love to hear some more voices in this session. I know could be challenging for some. Would love to hear voices in the chat as well. Thanks, Michelle, for kicking us off. Yep, so they were definitely setting a goal together, right? And you can see the way that that's based on the student data she was getting in front of him. I loved as well, Michelle, to add on, like she's setting the goal with the student. She's also asking the student, like, based on this, your understanding of what we just went over, what would your goal be, right? And not just kind of putting her idea for a goal right there. See, censoring, tapping, yes, it's really multi-sensory. It's really engaging for a student. Student work involved in self-assessment, self-reflection. Yeah, he gets a chance to kind of think around his phonics. Melissa, thanks for putting instant feedback for the student. That student right away has that feedback and is able to kind of make those connections to the CVC words as we saw. Few things that I want to highlight, and it's all here in the chat. Again, teachers getting really, really specific around that type of skill that student is struggling with. So again, thinking about the CVC call out that was made in the video. Student got that opportunity to be kind of metacognitive and kind of make their thinking visible, thinking about where they want to learn, what they want to grow with that goal setting. And then again, that feedback's pretty instant. Student gets to see, where did I do well, right? Where are my mistakes? And what am I going to do next with them? So when we think about assessment, a lot of times, and I can speak from experience here, when I was at least first taught around assessment, I used to think of it as like a kind of bigger thing. And when we're thinking about reading foundational skills, it very well might be, right? It might be some sort of outcome assessment. But reading foundational skills assessments take a lot of different forms and can really vary in type and vary in amount of time. Overall, we would say there's 4 basic categories of assessment for reading foundational skills. When we think about universal screeners, those are these screening tests that are providing information around the knowledge and skill base of the student. Usually that's really appropriate for determining kind of the starting point for instruction. Progress monitoring assessments would say, are students making adequate progress? It could be something to say, do we need to adjust instruction? Do we need to, go back? Do we need to kind of think about how to bridge to that grade level content? It's usually ongoing, and it's usually really specifically aligned for one focus of instruction. Diagnostic assessments, those are also known as specific skill assessments. They ID really, really specifically students' strengths and students' weaknesses. It could be kind of used in tandem or even used as a progress monitoring assessment. And then finally, outcome assessment, that's kind of referencing in the beginning. This might be end of a major unit of instruction, end of the year. It's something that's going to provide data around how students are doing with their existing accomplishments. In the video, what we saw, again, this quick bit of feedback, we saw an example of progress monitoring assessment, which we know happens on a daily, weekly basis across classrooms across California. Your school or district might require something that's a little more formal for progress monitoring. We know, again, this can take a bunch of different forms. 3 of the ways that we often see this looks like in schools, or as you're kind of thinking around assessment, is through informal assessments, dictation, or potentially a unit stop and check. So an observation being something kind of like an informal checklist. This could be, if we're thinking about, again, like that immediate feedback we saw in the video, something that's going to give on-the-spot feedback, on-the-spot support, right, in order to move the student forward. Dictation that could occur weekly with a priority for example, reteaching following what we're seeing in students' responses. And then a unit stop and check. This is an example from CKLA, but would usually be based on whatever your district or school guidance or curriculum is. This example in this curriculum occurs about every 4 to 6 weeks, and again is really meant to be served kind of in the same vein of progress monitoring. Where are students and what can we do to move them forward? One of the things that I want to call out here, we're thinking about assessment, and just something really when it came to the top. When we're thinking about assessment differentiation, we just want to call out that, it's crucial that no one aspect of a student's identity really determines, for example, what kinds of supports they get. So for example, a student has an IEP or a student's a multilingual learner. All of the decisions we want to make in terms of instructionally how to move students forward, that should be really grounded in student data. And ultimately, and we saw this in the video, that data should be really useful for us so that those interventions or supports can be data-driven and can again help move students forward. So we're going to have a quick minute to chat about this. We have a couple of student scenarios. If you've taken the Arise courses, these might look familiar to you. We want to, again, draw on the brilliance of the group and think about some assessment decisions as educators with 2 connections to fluency practice when you think about that aspect of reading foundational skills. So I'm going to read aloud the scenario, and then again in the chat or coming off mute, whatever feels most comfortable, we'll just invite you to say a little bit about what you're thinking, some ideas of what you might do to support the student. We know there's a ton of context missing, and so again, kind of just thinking about the paragraph and the context we're giving. So Dante is a 2nd grade student. He reads with a high level of accuracy within text at 2nd grade level, but with a low rate and prosody. Doesn't stumble over most pronunciations, but he really doesn't comprehend most of what he reads. And so again, in the chat or coming off mute, would love to hear a few ideas. What might you do to support the student? Thanks in chat. Vocabulary, phrasing. Yep, go ahead.
Working together and try to, if we're reading a book, try to find small words and pronunciation, or like my case, if I'm showing a new book to her, that'll be matching books and work with the teacher so she can help me matching the work with similar like the pictures.
Yeah, thanks so much for that response. So really appreciate like kind of the chunking of the words, right? I think I heard you said, and then like that importance of the teacher and student relationship and making sure that students are really feeling supported there. And then, as appropriate too, like paying attention to aspects of genre that might support the student. And I appreciate that with the kind of comprehension. Also see responses in the chat around further assessment. Yeah, like what specifically, where specifically we might be able to help Dante in terms of that rate, in terms of possibly repeated readings, building vocabulary, especially again, thinking back to comprehension and really building knowledge. Beautiful. Thank you for those responses. Here is one response. Encourage you to think of it that way, not an answer. The teacher would do a grade level complex text for fluency practice. Because that repeated reading, and I see again, even more responses in the chat around repeated reading, it's going to give him that opportunity to build some schema, to build some vocabulary. And we would hope with that to improve his rate and prosody. And again, you might want to keep assessing, right? And checking in what students doing. So there's another scenario there, just for the sake of time, so we can get to a second video and a little bit of practice. I'm going to move through it pretty quickly, but again, it's on the slides if you want to go back to it. Last thing I do want to say on in this section though, because I know assessment can be, we could spend the whole 90 minutes talking about just this part. If you're curious to learn a little bit more about assessment, it could be types of assessments, it could be examples, it could be kind of strategies to like what now. We encourage you, there's a specific part of Arise that we actually want to point you to, and that's in our course, Foundational Skills. You scroll down to the module around the science of reading, the foundational skills block, part 3, you're going to find a whole section just devoted to assessment. And so encourage you to go there, again, as you're continuing to explore and grapple and build some knowledge around assessment. And with that, we will go ahead and move into the Foundational Skills Instructional Practice Guide.
Thanks, Alina. So as we mentioned earlier, we're going to spend some time now looking at a tool that was introduced to you in the Arise course, and we also introduced you if you were with us in the fall in our workshop. So this is a tool that was created by our colleagues at Student Achievement Partners, and it is a foundational skills observation tool. I'm going to put the link into the chat now, and we're going to ask you to open it because we're going to read a portion of it together, and then we're also going to use it in a few minutes when we're watching a video. So as you're opening that, I just want to let you know a few things about the tool. We're not going to read page 1 together. You can read, we'll encourage you to read that on your own. And if you were with us in the fall, you probably had a chance to read it. But a little bit of what's explained on the first page is more about the design of the tool and what it was intended for use. So this is intended to be a tool that is designed to help teachers grow their practice in different areas and to build their understanding of the best practices that are required in explicit teaching of foundational skills. So all of the indicators that are within this tool are things that we dig into within the Arise course and are aligned to best practices in foundational skills instruction. An important piece to note here, we love to encourage coaches and school leaders to use this as a tool to coach and support teachers in their development, but this is not meant to be a tool to evaluate teachers. And so as somebody who spends a lot of their time working directly with teachers, I was a teacher, I'm a coach of teachers. Like I always just want to emphasize, like this is a coaching teacher development tool. It's a great tool to use as a teacher to kind of self-assess and think about what areas of your instruction you would like to work on improving and growing, but it shouldn't be something that's used to evaluate teachers. And so there are 4 sections that you'll see here in the spring, or no, I'm mixing up my seasons. In the fall, we talked about aligned content and teacher-directed instruction, which aligns to systematic and explicit instruction. So today we're going to look at the second part, 2 parts that align to what we've just been talking about. So student practice and assessment and differentiation. So right now I am going to give you a chance to read through page 4, which if you have the document open, it should be easier than reading it on the screens on the slide here. But I give you just about 1 to 2 minutes to read through this page and take a look at each of those indicators and kind of where do you see some of the things that we were talking about earlier in our session, and think about the types of questions you might ask yourself if you're observing instruction or if you are kind of self-assessing yourself as it relates to this. So I will stop talking and give you a few minutes to read through just page 4, the one that looks like the one on the screen. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to skim through some of those indicators. And so what you'll see on the next slide are just some considerations to think about and kind of things that we want to be asking ourselves as we're using this tool. So in that first section on student practice, you should see some alignment there to what we talked about earlier in terms of that in context as well as out of context practice. So like I mentioned, it gives some examples there of what that out of context could look like. Games, puzzles, music, movement, worksheets, or discrete oral or written tasks. So we're thinking about, what practice are we seeing students use in and outside of text? And are all students engaging in this? So is this an opportunity where we're seeing, every student in the classroom is having an opportunity to engage in that practice? And so you'll see those questions, all, most, some, or few, or no, are kind of how we're thinking about each of these indicators. And then when it comes to assessment and differentiation, we're thinking about within the, part of the lesson that you have observed, or the part of the lesson that you may have taught and you're reflecting on as a teacher, what opportunities for assessment are present within that lesson and within the materials. And is there evidence that the teacher is responding to that data in the moment? Or if you are the teacher, did you feel like you were able to respond in the moment to your students and the feedback that they were giving you as they were practicing the target skill? So we are going to now give you a chance to use this tool as a observer of some foundational skills instructional practice. So you are going to only look again at page 4, and it's actually, if you would like to look at the page that just has those 4 indicators listed, the one on the left, you're welcome to do that, and only focus on student practice and assessment and differentiation, because that's our focus. Or you can look at page 4 and look at the more detailed indicators. It's up to you, but we know that, it's hard watching a Zoom and having things on your screen, but we'd encourage you just to think about the indicators that are on there as we watch this clip of instruction. And we are going to watch about 5 minutes of this video. So in this portion of the lesson, if you remember from either the Arise course or from our fall workshop, we watched this whole group portion of this lesson earlier. It's a first grade lesson. And now the students are engaging in practice together in partnerships or in groups. And so I'm going to encourage you to watch this and think about the indicators on the observation tool. When we come back together, I'd love to just hear, what are the examples that you saw aligned to the best practices in student practice, as well as assessment and differentiation. So we'll ask you to share some of those things after we watch 5 minutes of this video.
Josh and John wave and smile. They do not win. A lot of fun. I'm going to
Alina, do you want me to try to play it to see if it's not as choppy?
Did they win?
That works great. Sorry, I'm trying to turn off my video to make it a little bit better.
I can't promise that my internet will be any better, but let me try to play it to see if it happens to be a little bit better, and we'll see if we can.
and no song they make it to the moon. In the Josh and John wave and smile. They do not win.
Did they win? Oh, were they happy or sad? When I lose, I'm really sad. Why do you think they were happy? I think you're right. Can we talk about that question? Can you share that? What do you do now that you're done reading?
That's magic.
So it's not it, it's I.
It's this up
Ooh, really close. You said plane. Do you see the sound? What's a lane? Can you point to it in the picture? Good, that's where they're swimming. Jen lines up in lane 5. I noticed that the table that had the different version of the story, the worksheet, was really struggling. I noticed that the rest of the room was doing a great job buddy reading and even moving on to the comprehension questions, so I decided to sit with that table and echo read with them. Josh lines up in lane 6. Repeat. Josh lines up in lane 6. Put your finger on the. The kids are up on the blocks. Your turn. I moved some of their fingers to make sure that they were touching the correct words. I said the sentence and then they repeated. At first, I didn't hear all voices, so I changed where I was sitting at the table to help 2 specific scholars, and then I heard them echoing my voice and following along with their fingers, so I knew that then they had heard and repeated the entire story. Swim, yells Gran. Swim fast. Repeat. Swim, yells Gran. Swim fast. Josh and Jen swim as fast as they can. Josh and Jen swim as fast as they can. They swim and swim. They swim. In no time, they make it to the end. In no time, they make it to the end. Did Josh win? Asked Gran. Did Josh win? Asked Gran. Keyshawn, please don't go ahead. I know you know how to read it. Did Jen win? Did Jen win? Josh and Jen wave and smile. Josh and Jen wave and smile. They did not win. They did not win, but they had a lot of fun. But they, look at the words. Sorry, one friend wasn't looking. Look at the words. But they had a lot of fun. You did a great job repeating my voice. I want you to try to answer the first question. Who went to the swim meet? Keyshawn, get the pencils. Who went to the swim meet? Once they were ready to move on to the comprehension piece, I left and I noticed at the end that they had completed some of the first question. I want to keep them with this material, this grade level material, because I think it's important that they're getting exposed to first grade sounds and phonics, but I do think that scaffold helps them to actually do the work.
Okay, thank you for your patience. I know that is a little hard to hear some parts of that. Hopefully it was a little bit better near the end. I think Zoom likes to do this thing where they block out the background noise, and sometimes in this video the background noise is the kids talking. So sorry about that, but would love to just put into the chat, based on what you could hear and what you could see, and looking at that observation tool, just what are some of the things that you saw in this video aligned to the best practices in assessment and differentiation and student practice. So what did you see students doing? What did you hear or see the teacher doing? That was some evidence of student practice and assessment and differentiation. Feel free to come off mute or to put things into the chat that you saw. Yes.
Okay, for the previous and this one, they are reading, working together, and the teacher is repeating and reading with them and pointing. So they read and they see it when the teacher is pointing to them, so they're learning better.
I hear what sounds like a beautiful bird chirping near you, but thank you for sharing that. So many great things you shared. So like the pointing at the words, the students working together, they were doing that choral reading together as well. An echo reading with the teacher. Anything else that we saw related to, and again, you can come off mute, you can put it into the chat. So we shared some things related to student practice. Anything else related to practice or related to assessment and differentiation? And I saw earlier when we were watching your comment, Nicole, about even though if you can't hear, you could still see students supporting one another with the pointing at the words. And the teachers providing that immediate feedback for students. What else did we see?
I just liked how she was really conscious about like saying we are keeping the kids at their grade level and they are accessing this text. Whatever way it takes, we're going to help them get there. And then that she gave them a task and then walked away assuming that they will get on it. And they did.
Exactly. I think it's really important to hear at the end that even if those students needed additional support, that she really needed them to stay within that grade level content. Thanks for naming that, Nicole. And again, giving them that opportunity after to still show their understanding of the text through those comprehension questions. They were writing them, that maybe they would be discussing them later. And again, thanks for sharing adjusting instruction for supporting the group, students who needed more guidance and modeling. So really thinking about differentiating there, but really keeping the grade level content as the area of focus. So when we go to the next slide, we'll see just a recap of a lot of what we saw there. Some of these are things that you may not have been able to hear, but also did happen within the portion within the video. And again, I encourage you, on your resource page is this entire video of this entire lesson. It's very long, but you can, if you want to skip and watch that portion again, it starts at around 46 minutes in. But the students were engaged in that partner reading. They were using a decodable text. So that was the practice opportunity in context. They were recognizing the spelling pattern as they were reading. This part might have happened actually before, but there's a point where the student says, that's a magic E, to help their partner who was decoding. So the student was naming that spelling pattern for their partner. The teacher was asking some basic comprehension questions. So did they win? You know, were they sad? If they weren't sad, why do you think they were happy? So helping to, make meaning of the text that students read and to check their comprehension and not just their ability to read the words on the page. And additionally, supporting vocabulary building. So there was an interaction around the lane because it was a swim meet. So the students were swimming. What's a lane? Can you point to the lane? So using the picture to say, like, this is what a lane is. Good. Yeah. A lane is where they swim. So reinforcing that vocabulary word for students who may or may not be familiar with the word. And we talked about some of these assessment differentiation pieces, but, students had a slightly different version, but we're still working on the grade level content, and students were partnering. She was strategic in how she had partnered students, and really using that proximity to both support students in their partnerships or individually, as well as in that group at the end. So lots of different points here related to practice and assessment and differentiation. So hopefully you could see some of what was on that observation tool in action in this video. So we're going to move to breakout rooms in just a second to close for a few minutes, but I want to name that tool obviously is there for you to use. That Student Achievement Partners also has a similar tool for language comprehension, and they're also coming out with some new revised tools soon, but really encourage you to think about how you can use that, whether it's to reflect on your own practice or to share with others at your school and use as a tool to observe and align on strong instruction. So it's really a great, pretty accessible tool, in my opinion, that helps to bring some of what you might learn in the course or in a more formal learning setting to life in the classroom. So I think I'm passing it to you, Alina, to wrap us up in our breakout rooms.
Yeah, sounds good. So we are going to spend just about 5 minutes in breakout rooms. We want to give you a chance just to process a little bit about what you heard, what you're thinking of, what's really top of mind for you. We have a couple of just suggestions in terms of focus questions for you. Please feel free to take one of them. Please feel free to share what's top of mind. What are some strengths? What are some areas of focus? What conditions are necessary to bring some of these best practices that we talked about today to life in your school or district? And then really invite and encourage you to say, like, what affirmed your practice, or maybe even what challenged it? So I'm going to go ahead and open rooms. This will just be for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and wrap up together. They are self-select, so please feel free to choose the room that is most aligned with your role. There's teacher, paraeducators room, there's school district leaders. I also put a room called very creatively other, if that does not align exactly with your role. But again, just spend about 5 minutes having some discussion with folks around what's top of mind. And if you need help getting to your room too, please know that we are more than able. Able and willing, I would say, too. Can we help anyone who's left to get to your room? With access to these slides, all of the slides from the fall. There's a lot here, and we know that there's a lot of conditions, that we need to have in place in order to, really make this come to life. And we know too, there's a lot of strengths within the room. So appreciate you taking some time to share. Before we go, I want to just put our emails on the screen as well, mine and Beth's, in case we can support it all, or if you have any questions from today. And with that, we'll thank you from TNTP, and Emily, I'll pass back to you to close us out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the great content and just pieces to think about. If this is a topic of further interest to you or to colleagues or folks on your team or in your system, what we got today was a small portion of what is available in the online learning courses available through Project Arise. And so they're listed on the screen are the courses that are available. Literacy is equity, foundational skills, and comprehension and knowledge building being developed by our friends at PNTP, executive functions and literacy from our friends at the center, and then intensive intervention developed by the National Center for Intensive Intervention and CII. So the link there is at the bottom of that slide and also going into the chat. If you are interested in learning more, this is a wonderful free place to be able to do that. So we highly encourage you to check that out. And then also this workshop series continues. So on May 16th, same time on Zoom, NCII is going to be sharing what it looks like to intensify intervention for students. And so there is the bit.ly link to register for that third part of our series. If you're interested in getting that content as well, we would love to have you then. Otherwise, thank you for your time today, especially we know, again, what a crunch of the year this time is. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being in a learning stance, and we hope to see you back on the 16th. Thank you.